first thing I noticed when my father-in-law set his coffee cup down was the silence. Not the comfortable kind that settles over a long Sunday meal, but the sharp kind, the kind that makes you aware of the refrigerator humming 3 rooms away. Howard Bennett, my fiancé's father, had just finished telling me with the patience of a man explaining algebra to a child that hospitals these days had been ruined by what he called the consultant class. He was leaning back in his chair, one thumb hooked into his belt, the other hand resting on the table beside his plate of pot roast. And I just sat there, folding my napkin in my lap, listening to him explain medicine to me. The problem, he was saying, is that nobody who actually touches a patient runs anything anymore. It's all administrators, people with business degrees, people who couldn't tell you the difference between a stacked order and a routine draw if their lives depended on it. His wife, Linda, gave him a soft look across the table, the kind of look that's been polishing the same edge for 40 years. I waited, then I set my fork down gently and met his eyes. "Howard," I said, "I think you'd be interested to know that I'm the new Chief Medical Officer at St. Luke's." The fork in his hand actually stopped. I watched it. He was halfway to his mouth, and it just stopped, hovering an inch above the plate. His son, my fiancé Trevor, exhaled the kind of breath you let out when you've been holding it for half an hour without realizing. For a long moment, nobody said anything. But to understand how the 4 of us ended up at that dining table in suburban Cleveland on a Sunday afternoon in October, with Howard Bennett's fork frozen in midair, you have to go back a few weeks. To the morning I signed the paperwork. To the night, 3 weeks before that, when Trevor told me his father didn't actually know what I did for a living. My name is Caroline Whitaker. I'm 33 years old. I've been a physician since I was 26, and 3 weeks before that Sunday dinner, I had accepted the position of Chief Medical Officer at St. Luke's Regional Medical Center, a 600-bed hospital that serves most of the eastern suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio. It was a kind of promotion that gets framed in a hallway somewhere. They put my name on a brass plate outside an office that smelled faintly of new carpet, and I went home that first evening and ate cereal standing at the kitchen counter because I hadn't had time to grocery shop in 3 weeks. That same week, Trevor proposed. We'd been dating for 2 years. He's a software engineer at a healthcare data firm downtown, which is how we met, actually, a panel on patient outcomes in a hotel conference room with bad coffee and worse pastries. He's funny and steady, and the kind of person who remembers what you said 3 months ago and brings it back up at the right moment. He proposed in the kitchen of his apartment on a Tuesday night. No candles, no rose petals. Just him on one knee on the linoleum, holding a ring his grandmother had left him. And I said yes before he'd finished asking. I should have known something was off when he told me about meeting his parents. We were sitting on his couch, eating Thai food out of the containers, and he mentioned it casually, the way you'd mention a dentist appointment. "So my parents want to have us over for dinner." "Sure," I said. "When?" "Couple weeks." He poked at his pad CU with his chopsticks. "Maybe end of October." I waited. He kept poking. "Trevor." What aren't you telling me?" He set the container down. He has this thing he does when he's about to say something he doesn't want to say, where he rubs the back of his neck with one hand and looks at the floor like the answer might be written there. "My dad," he said. He's a complicated guy." "Complicated how?" "He's a retired surgeon." "Okay." "Vascular surgeon. Practiced for 40 years at one of the big hospitals in town. He's, old school." I was starting to see where this was going. He doesn't know what I do, does he? Trevor winced, actually winced, like I'd flicked his ear. "He knows you're a doctor, and he thinks you're do family medicine out in one of the suburbs." I stared at him. "Trevor, we've been dating for 2 years." "I know." "You told your father, who is a retired surgeon, that I'm a family medicine doctor in the suburbs." "Caroline, you have to understand my dad. He has very specific opinions about hospital leadership, about administrators, about anyone who doesn't, scrub in every day. And I wanted him to meet you, not your resume." I set my food down on the coffee table and looked at him for a long moment. I wasn't angry exactly. I was something else, something closer to amused, but with an edge to it, the edge of a woman who had spent her entire career being introduced as Dr. Whitaker, who runs the cardiac program, and then having to spend the next 20 minutes proving she was actually a physician and not someone's assistant. So I'm supposed to walk into your parents' house and let your father think I'm what exactly? Just a doctor. A regular doctor. Trevor, there's no such thing as a regular doctor. You know what I mean. I did know what he meant. And honestly, after a moment, I started to laugh, not because it was funny exactly, but because it was so absurd. 2 years. 2 years of dinners and weekends and meeting his college friends and going to his cousin's wedding, and the entire time he'd been quietly editing my career down to something his father could swallow. How long has he had this idea? Trevor looked at the floor again. Since the second time I mentioned you. And you never corrected him? I tried, the first time. He started in on, hospital administrators, and how the suits had ruined medicine, and how he had nothing but respect for doctors who actually saw patients, and I let it go. You let it go for 2 years. I let it go for 2 years. I should have been angrier. I think part of me was. But I was also looking at this man I loved, who was so afraid of his father's opinion that he'd spent 24 months building a fictional version of me, and I felt mostly sad for him. I'd met Howard Bennett's type before. I worked with them every day. They were the senior physicians who walked into board meetings and complained about productivity metrics and called the CFO that kid, even though the CFO was 53 years old. They were good doctors, most of them. They'd built the hospitals the rest of us inherited. But they could be exhausting. Trevor, I said, I'm going to meet your parents, and I'm going to be polite, and I'm going to be polite, and I'm going to let your father say whatever he wants to say at dinner. But I'm not going to lie. If he asks me directly what I do, I'm going to tell him. That's fair, he said. That's completely fair. Good. He probably won't ask directly, though. Trevor. I'm just saying. The drive to Howard and Linda's house took about 40 minutes. They live in one of those older suburbs on the east side. Big trees, brick houses set back from the street, the kind of neighbourhood where the mailboxes all match because the homeowners association says they have to. Trevor's hands were tight on the steering wheel. I watched the leaves turning yellow along the side of the road and thought about my mother, who'd been an emergency room nurse for 35 years, and what she would have said about all of this. She would have laughed. She would have told me to wear my good earrings and let the man hang himself. I was wearing my good earrings. Caroline. If it gets weird, just kick me under the table or something. Trevor, I'm not going to kick you under the table. We're not in middle school. Right. Just breathe. He pulled into the driveway, and before he turned the car off, he looked at me one more time. Thank you, he said, for doing this. I'm meeting your parents. It's not a deployment. Still. Howard Bennett opened the door before we made it up the porch steps. He was taller than I'd expected. Most of the men I'd seen in his photos had been the version of himself that he was at 50, in scrubs, surrounded by other men in scrubs. The Howard at the door was in his early 70s, silver-haired, wearing a navy cardigan over a button-down shirt and a pair of khakis with a crease ironed down the front. His handshake was firm and brief, the way a man shakes hands when he's evaluating something. You must be Caroline. I am. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Bennett. Howard, please. He stepped aside. Come in, come in. Linda's been cooking since 8 this morning. I keep telling her it's just dinner. She doesn't listen. The house smelled like pot roast and something, cinnamon, an apple pie maybe, cooling somewhere out of sight. Linda came out of the kitchen wiping her hands on a dish towel. She was small and quick and had the warmest eyes I've seen on a person in a long time. She hugged Trevor first, then took both my hands in hers and squeezed them. Caroline, look at you. Trevor's been hiding you. He has, I said. I keep telling him to stop. She laughed, and Howard made a small approving sound behind us, and we moved into the dining room. The table was already set. Good china, cloth napkins, a small bowl of fresh flowers in the centre. Linda had clearly been planning this for weeks. Howard sat at the head, I sat across from Trevor, and Linda took the chair to Howard's left. She brought out the roast and the potatoes and a green salad and a basket of dinner rolls that smelled like they'd come out of the oven about 15 seconds before we arrived. For a while the conversation was easy. Linda asked where I was from originally, and I told her about growing up outside Columbus, my mother, the ER nurse, my father, the high school principal who passed away when I was 19. She asked how Trevor and I had met. She asked about the ring, which she had already seen in photographs but wanted to see again. Howard ate carefully and listened, and every so often he would ask a question of his own. Where had I gone to undergrad? Where had I gone to medical school? Where had I gone to medical school? Where had I done residency? He nodded at each answer. The University of Michigan. Northwestern. Cleveland Clinic. Good schools, all of them. He seemed pleased. And now you're practicing here in town? He asked. I felt Trevor stiffen across from me. I am. Whereabouts? St. Luke's. Howard nodded slowly. Good hospital. I sent patients there for years. What service? There it was. The opening. Internal medicine, originally. I did a fellowship in cardiology after that. Cardiology. His eyebrows went up. Now that's interesting. Trevor never mentioned. I thought you were doing family practice somewhere out east. I didn't look at Trevor. I kept my eyes on Howard. No, sir. Cardiology. Huh. He took a bite of his roast. Well, St. Luke's has a decent cardiac program. Or it used to. I don't know what it looks like now under the new leadership. And there it was. The opening had become a door, and Howard had walked right through it. Linda must have heard something in his voice, because she set her water glass down. Howard. I'm just making conversation, Linda. You're making a speech. I haven't said anything yet. But he was about to. I could see it gathering in him, the way you can see a wave forming before it crests. He took another bite. He chewed thoughtfully. He set his fork down. You know what's wrong with hospitals now, Caroline? Tell me. Administration. He said the word the way other men say profanity. Used to be when I came up, hospitals were run by doctors, real doctors. Men, and a few women too, who'd been at the bedside for 30 years before anybody let them near a budget. Now it's all MBAs. People who've never held a scalpel. People who've never told a family their husband isn't coming out of surgery. They look at the spreadsheets and they cut the things that don't make money, which is exactly the things that matter most. They've turned medicine into a business. Howard, Linda said again. Caroline doesn't need a lecture. I'm not lecturing. I'm explaining. That's the same thing when you do it. Trevor laughed, a thin, nervous laugh. Howard ignored him. Look at St. Luke's. Just for an example. They brought in a new CMO last month. I read about it in the alumni newsletter. Some young person from out of town. No background at the institution. Doesn't know the staff, doesn't know the medical community, doesn't know the patient population, and they put this person in charge of clinical operations for the whole system. Now how is that supposed to work? I took a small sip of water. Linda was watching me. Trevor was studying his napkin like it contained the secrets of the universe. Maybe they wanted fresh eyes, I said. Fresh eyes. Howard chuckled. That's the language they use. Fresh eyes, disruptive thinking, strategic vision. It's all language designed to make you forget that the people they're putting in charge have, in many cases, never actually run a service line, never managed a code, never sat in a room with a grieving family. It's all theory for them. It's all metrics. Sometimes metrics matter, I said. They do. Of course they do. But you can't lead a hospital on metrics alone. You have to understand what it feels like to lose a patient at 3 a.m. You have to understand what the residents are going through. You have to have done it. And these consultants they're bringing in, these MBAs, these people with their PowerPoints, they haven't done it. They don't know. Howard, Linda, I'm not insulting anyone. I'm just being honest. Caroline's a cardiologist. She knows. Tell her, Caroline. You see it every day. You watch these administrators come in and tell you how to do your job, and they've never done your job a day in their lives. I looked at him. He was leaning forward now, his hands flat on the table, completely confident that I was about to agree with him. He had decided over the course of the last 20 minutes that I was on his team, that I was a fellow soldier in the long war against the suits. I thought about my mother, about her good earrings. "Howard," I said, "I think you'd be interested to know that I'm the new chief medical officer at St. Luke's." That's when his fork stopped. I want to describe that pause precisely because I've thought about it many times since. It wasn't the silence of a man who's been caught. It was the silence of a man who suddenly has to reorganize his entire understanding of the last hour of his life. You could see it happening in his face. He was running back through everything he'd said. The MBAs, the PowerPoints, the young person from out of town who didn't know the medical community, the whole speech, replaying in real time with a new actor in the lead role. Linda put her hand to her mouth, and I genuinely couldn't tell if she was trying not to gasp or not to laugh. Trevor finally exhaled. He'd been holding it for who knows how long. Howard set his fork down. He took a long drink of water. He cleared his throat. "You're the new CMO." "Yes, sir." "At St. Luke's." "Yes. Started last month. 3 weeks ago." He nodded slowly. He nodded slowly. He nodded again. He looked at his plate. He looked at Trevor. Trevor stared at his roll. "Cardiologist?" "Yes." "Cleveland Clinic Fellowship?" "Yes." "And before that, Northwestern?" "Yes." "And you've been running, the cardiac service somewhere?" "For the last 4 years. At Mercy General before I came over to St. Luke's." "Mercy General." He said it like a man reading the verdict. "I sat on the board at Mercy General for 6 years." "I know." He looked up sharply at that. "You know. Your name was on the wall, Howard. In the cardiology suite, the Bennett wing." He just stared at me. "I walked past your name every day for 4 years." Linda finally laughed. She couldn't help it. It was a short, surprised, almost apologetic laugh, and she covered her mouth with her napkin and apologized to no one in particular. Howard turned his head slowly toward her and gave her a look that I'm sure had silenced a lot of operating rooms over the course of his career. She held up both hands. I'm sorry. It's just... Oh, Howard. Linda, you spent 20 minutes. I know what I spent. 20 minutes. Linda. Trevor was somewhere between mortified and relieved. I think part of him had been waiting for this moment for 2 years, and now that it had arrived he didn't quite know what to do with his face. Howard wiped his mouth with his napkin. He folded it carefully and set it on the table. He sat back. "Caroline." "Yes, I owe you an apology." "You don't, actually." "I do. I absolutely do. I have been talking, for the last half hour, to a person who I assumed couldn't possibly understand what I was saying, and I see now that you understood it perfectly well. Better than I do, probably." "Howard." "No, let me finish. I came up in a world where the people running hospitals were people I trained alongside. I knew them. They knew me. And somewhere over the last 20 years, that world stopped existing, and I've been complaining about it ever since, like a man yelling at the weather. I made assumptions about you tonight that were unfair, and I made them loudly, and I made them in my own house, and I'm sorry." I let it sit for a moment. The clock in the hallway ticked. "Howard," I said. "Thank you," he nodded. "I want to say one thing back, though. Please. I've read your papers, the ones on graft patency in the late 90s. I read them in fellowship. They were assigned reading." He looked at me. For the first time all evening, he looked genuinely surprised. They were. Huh! You weren't wrong, by the way, about a lot of what you said. There are administrators who haven't done the work. There are leadership decisions made on spreadsheets that shouldn't be. I have spent more meetings than I can count trying to explain to people in suits why we can't cut a nursing line just because the numbers say we can. You're not wrong. I just happen to be one of the people in the room arguing the other side." He was quiet for a long moment. "That," he said finally, "is a useful thing to know." Linda stood up. "I'm going to bring out the pie." "Linda." "Howard, you need pie." She disappeared into the kitchen. And for a beat, it was just the three of us. Howard looked at his son. Trevor looked back. They had one of those silent father-son exchanges that you can't decipher unless you grew up in the family. Trevor: "Yeah, Dad." "You told me she was a family medicine doctor in the suburbs." "I know." "For 2 years." "I know, Dad." "Why?" Trevor finally looked up. "Because I wanted you to meet her, not her resume." Howard was quiet. Then, very slowly, he nodded. "Fair enough." The pie was apple, with a lattice crust, and Linda had been right. Howard did need pie. We ate it in something close to comfortable silence, and then Howard asked me in a different voice, a quieter voice, about the cardiac program at St. Luke's. What we were doing well, what we needed to fix. I told him. He listened the way good doctors listen. He asked follow-up questions that surprised me with their precision. By the time the coffee came, we were two physicians having a conversation, and Howard was leaning forward in his chair the way he probably used to lean forward in surgical conferences 30 years ago. Linda caught my eye across the table and smiled. Howard called me the following Wednesday. I was in my office. My assistant came in looking slightly puzzled and said, "There's a Howard Bennett on line 2. He says he knows you." I picked up. "Howard." "Caroline." "I hope this isn't a bad time." "It's fine. What can I do for you?" "I wanted to know if you'd have lunch with me. Just the two of us. I've been thinking about Sunday. We met on Friday at a diner near the hospital, one of those places that's been there since the 60s and serves coffee in those thick white mugs that never get hot. He was already in the booth when I arrived, reading the newspaper, actual newspaper, folded into quarters. He stood up when he saw me. Old habits. Caroline. Howard. We sat. He poured me coffee from the carafe on the table. "I want to say 2 things," he said, "and then I want to ask you something." "Okay. First thing, I called my old friend Dennis Holloway, who's still on the board at St. Luke's. I asked him about you. He spent 15 minutes telling me what a good hire you were. He said the medical staff was thrilled. He said the search committee had been looking for someone like you for 2 years. That's kind of him. He said you were the best clinical leader he'd seen come through in a decade. Howard, he's being generous. Dennis isn't generous. He's been a curmudgeon since 1987. If he says you're the best, you're the best." I laughed. He smiled a small, careful smile. "Second thing, I owe Linda an apology too. She tried to stop me 3 times at dinner. I ignored her. That's been a habit of mine for a long time, and I'm trying to get better at it. She's the smartest person in our house. I should listen to her more." "That sounds like a good plan." "It does, doesn't it?" He took a sip of his coffee. "Now, the question." "Yes. I'd like to meet with you, occasionally, if you'd be willing. Not as your father-in-law, not as a friend, even, not yet. As a retired clinician who spent 40 years at a hospital in this town, and who might, occasionally, have useful perspective on the kinds of decisions you're going to have to make. I won't tell you what to do. I'll just answer questions, if you have them, and if you don't have any, we can talk about baseball." I looked at him for a long moment. "Howard." "Yes, that's the nicest offer anyone's made me since I took this job." "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." He nodded once, like he was closing a chart. "Good. Now, tell me about your nursing situation. Dennis said you've got a retention problem in the cardiac unit." We talked for 2 hours. The coffee got cold. The waitress refilled it twice. He didn't tell me what to do, like he'd promised. He asked questions. The kind of questions that made me think more clearly than I'd thought in months. By the time we got up to leave, I had a list of 3 things I wanted to try Monday morning, and Howard had paid the check without me noticing. "Howard, don't. You don't have to. I know I don't have to." We walked out into the parking lot. The October light was that low gold kind that makes everything look like it matters. He stopped beside his car and turned to face me. "Caroline, yes, my son loves you. I know. He should have told me the truth 2 years ago. He should have, but I understand why he didn't. I haven't always been the easiest man to tell things to. You're easier than you think." He looked at me for a long moment. "Thank you for Sunday," he said. "Thank you for not making it worse than it needed to be. You made the apology, Howard. I just ate my pie. He laughed. He had a good laugh. I'd never heard it before that moment. We had dinner at his and Linda's house again 2 weeks later. Linda made lasagna this time, on purpose, I think, just to mix things up. Howard pulled my chair out before I sat down. He didn't lecture anyone about anything. He asked me about my week. He asked Trevor about his work, properly this time, with real curiosity. After dinner, while Linda and I cleared the plates, he and Trevor sat on the back porch for a long time, talking about something I couldn't hear. When we drove home that night, Trevor was quiet for the first 10 minutes. Then he looked over at me. He likes you. I know, really likes you. He doesn't always like people, my dad. I gathered. What did you do? I thought about it. I watched the streetlights pass. I let him be wrong out loud, I said, and then I gave him a way back. Trevor was quiet for another minute. That's a hell of a thing to know how to do. It's the job, Trevor. Maybe. I looked over at him. The man I was going to marry. The man who had spent 2 years editing me down because he thought his father couldn't handle the real version. I wasn't angry about it anymore. I had been, a little, that first night on his couch, but sitting in the car on the way home from a good dinner with people I was going to call family for the rest of my life, I found I didn't have any room left for it. Trevor, yeah. No more editing. No more editing. I mean it. Whatever I am, that's who shows up at the table. Got it. Good. We drove the rest of the way in the comfortable kind of silence this time. The kind that doesn't make you aware of the refrigerator 3 rooms away. The kind that means something has been settled, and there's no need to keep talking about it. I thought a lot, in the months since, about what Howard said at the diner. About being easier to tell things to than I'd thought. Most of us are, I think. Most of us have built ourselves up into something taller and louder than we needed to be, because we were afraid that if we softened, the world would stop taking us seriously. And the truth is, when somebody finally tells us the thing we didn't want to hear, in a voice that isn't trying to humiliate us, we mostly find that we can take it. Howard and I have lunch every couple of months now, sometimes at the diner, sometimes at a hospital cafeteria, which he says is better than it used to be, which is the closest thing to a compliment Howard gives. He doesn't tell me what to do. He asks questions. I answer them. I'm a better CMO for it, and on Sundays, sometimes, when we drive out to his and Linda's house for dinner, I think about that first night, about the fork frozen in mid-air, about a man who had spent his whole career being the most experienced person in any room, suddenly discovering he wasn't. I think the real test of a person isn't whether they make a mistake like that, it's what they do in the minute afterward. Howard set his fork down. He took a drink of water. He looked me in the eye and told me he was sorry, and then he ate his pie. That's all of it, really. That's the whole story. If you've ever sat across a table from someone who decided who you were before you opened your mouth, I hope you've had the chance at some point to set your napkin down and say the quiet thing that changed the temperature of the room. And I hope, if it ever happens to you the other way around, that you have the grace Howard had, that you set down your fork and apologize and eat your pie. Because in my experience, the loudest moments aren't the ones that change people. It's the quiet ones. It's the half-second after the room goes still, when someone decides, in that breath, whether they're going to defend the version of themselves they walked in with, or become someone slightly better by the time they walk out. Howard became someone slightly better that night. I'm trying too. I've thought about that Sunday many times since it happened. The fork frozen in mid-air, the clock ticking in the hallway, the way Howard set down his napkin and said the word "sorry" out loud in his own dining room to a woman he'd spent half an hour underestimating, and every time I come back to it I notice the same thing. Nothing about that evening was accidental. Every part of it followed from a choice someone made earlier. Trevor chose, 2 years ago, to make me smaller than I was. He did it out of love, I think, or what he believed was love. He wanted his father to meet the woman, not the title. But the moment he edited me down, he set the whole evening in motion. Howard sat down to dinner with a fictional version of me, and so he behaved the way he would have behaved with that fictional person. That's how it works. We don't get to plant seeds and then be surprised by what grows. Howard chose, decades ago, to let his pride harden into certainty. He's not a bad man. He never was. But he stopped asking questions somewhere along the way, and he started giving lectures instead. And one Sunday afternoon, a young woman across his table watched him do it for 30 minutes before she set him straight. The cause was in him long before that meal. The effect just took its time arriving, and I chose to. I chose not to humiliate him. That was the part I had the most control over. When the room went quiet and the fork stopped moving, I could have made it worse. I could have catalogued everything he'd said. I could have made him pay for 2 years of being talked around. Instead, I waited. I let him find his own way to the apology, because I knew he had it in him. That's the part I'm proudest of, and I want to be honest, it wasn't easy. It took the kind of patience you only build by being underestimated more times than you can count. I think about what I want to carry forward from all of it. There's a kind of strength that doesn't need to announce itself. There's a kind of intelligence that knows when silence is doing more work than speech. And there's a kind of decency that gives another person room to be wrong out loud, and then room to walk back from it without losing themselves. Those 3 things sit on a shelf together in my mind now. Character, judgment, endurance. I'm still working on all of them. Howard called me his daughter at Thanksgiving. He didn't make a speech about it. He just passed me the gravy and said, "Caroline, daughter, would you mind?" And I almost cried into the mashed potatoes, because I knew exactly what it had cost him to get there, and I knew exactly what it had cost me to wait. That's what I want you to take with you, if you take anything at all. The loudest version of yourself isn't the strongest one, and the people worth keeping are the ones who can apologize and mean it and then eat their pie.